And so last time, again, those who were not here, the idea was that before we dive into a particular study, we should, at least in general terms, familiarize ourselves more with the literature. Has there been anything done on complaining? Are we reinventing a bicycle, or just simply retesting the sort of old hypothesis in a new sample? Or nothing has been done and we have to invent the theory and, maybe even have some sort of a theoretical paper at some point, or at least, credit ourselves with some theoretical framework. Or maybe there is some work we know, for example, on complaining in consumer studies, consumer behavior. So it's very different because they're looking at sort of post-consumption satisfaction, essentially. Whereas in our case, it's team dynamics. So the context is very different, but maybe we can use some of those theories. So a quick search last time, and we'll obviously talk more about it today, but revealed that there had been some studies that looked at, for example, cultural values and complaining in consumer behavior. So maybe we'll, use the theory, but, apply it in a new context or something like that. And so I saw that Justin, oh yeah, go ahead.
So I found 7 articles that I thought could be really good about in terms of creating some parameters and definition and understanding, 2 of which overlapped with the ones that you found, Vas. But so I uploaded just now the share worked this time.
Let's share just so in case we have, or those who are watching the recording know what we're talking about. So you put it here. Yeah. I see yours. Yeah.
So yeah, and the first article, the Obey Russo article, I think if you look at that, it does a really nice job in defining complaining, and it's not around so much consumer behavior. So I think you're right. The majority of research that I've seen has been around consumer behavior, but this one starts to tap a little bit into what we're looking into, and does a pretty good job of creating some parameters around the definition, although based on what Daria read to us of the definition last meeting or meeting or 2 ago, it's not precisely but as that definition, but it still starts to create some interesting parameters.
Yeah, and it's actually about teams, and they have quite a few teams. So it's actually not.
Yeah, but I think I've read this one, and it said that it's different. The complaining is different from voice, and so on. So
right, and that's why it is different. And so I think there's room then, as we talked about, to really do a deep dive into the literature to understand how people are referring to it and how we want to refer to it, because if we're going against the grain on how we define complaining, then we might.
Well,
what journal is it? Journal of Managerial Psychology. Okay.
Not completely. I've have a couple of interesting sources. One of them actually is a book, so I haven't read it. Obviously, I just kind of looked through stuff. So it seems like there are 2 lines of thinking about complaining, and one of them is what I was saying before. So it's kind of like this counterproductive behavior, voicing your grievances or your unhappiness. And there is a research that talks about cycles of complaining.
Yeah. I like that one too. Yeah.
Kind of contagious behavior in complaining. But there are studies that also say, and this is kind of like from critical perspective side of the issue, there are studies that say that complaining, even though it's kind of negative, can have very positive outcomes. And some people use it to build trust, which I thought was very interesting for teams, because we kind of have a lot of research about trust building in teams. Or kind of creating cohesiveness. Like imagine if I come to a meeting and start complaining about weather or something, and you agree with me, and all of a sudden we are kind of on the same team here.
Sort of like the same effect as rumors, or so we are, at a point of connection.
So basically there is a research, and it's really just at its infancy. I found like maybe a couple of papers, and none of them were empirical. They were kind of more of suggestions than testing a hypothesis that said that actually complaining might be an instrument in team building.
So the only thing is, I really love this idea. So it's kind of similar to when people gossip. So sort of, that puts them together, binds them together. So it's a sort of sign of trust and sign of, I don't know, some sort of a connection. And so when we complain about, let's say we complain about, oh, those, whatever party we don't like, or if we complain about maybe some politicians or complain about the weather, as you said, the only problem here is that we don't have those kinds of data. That would be because we only have complaining about either project or team members. But that would be cool because, right, if we sit and, sort of complain about something that we both don't like, that could be, that's a way to sort of connect.
One thing we could do though, Vas, we have, we do have some of that qualitative data that we've been thinking about capturing the complaints. It would be interesting if there are teams that we could identify that have several complainers.
Yeah, like, maybe, that.
If it's already like infected the team, the complaining behavior, then it could be like the flip side of it. Like it's a good team building thing. They're all united, about whatever issue they're upset about.
Actually, since you mentioned the time factor, I don't think we've talked about that, but so Daria mentioned, I also selected a few studies that talked about so-called team cycles or behavioral cycles. So basically how it can either be a spiral where, I complain, you get annoyed, you start complaining, and before you know it, everybody's complaining. Or it could be a positive cycle where when I complain, so basically more like voice. So I complain, the team takes notice, we discuss, and we fix it. And so maybe we can look at it sort of longitudinally and see how much complaining was going in week 1, 2, 3, 4. And then see, after the first complaint, do we see more of it or do we see less of it? And by the way, maybe there are both types. And then maybe in one case, it leads to better performance. And in the other case, it leads to worse performance than, for example, teams that never had complaints. So sort of, if you take it in a healthy way and take it more as, voice versus if you take it as annoyance. And then in those cases, obviously, yeah. My concern about this study is that, how should I put it? I hope this is not something we will end up with, because it almost looks to me that they had some factors and they were trying to find a way how to put them together so that, they get the right sort of, in the data fit indices. So the theory seems okay, but I don't find it as particularly elegant and memorable, so to speak. So just, everything relates to everything. And yeah, it kind of makes some sense that between performance and processes. So, but I'm not sure about this meaningfulness and task interdependence. I'm sure you can, come up with some theoretical. I'm hoping that we will have something much more, okay. To the point. Yes, Justin.
So I want to jump in. So to me, I guess two things jumped out in terms of our model. One is we need to understand complaining better. So not only do we have to define the construct, as you guys have been mentioning so far, we have to say, well, what's the purpose of complaining? To who am I complaining? Like there's all kinds of different facets of complaining that are not well articulated, at least not in this paper, and that we have an opportunity to clarify. So I think that's quite important. But in terms of theory,
to that one, if I may. So yes, not only define, but also typology. Because yes, there is complaining as complaining. There is complaining as bitching, as we said, complaining as voice, complaining about. So there may be so many different nuances that yet, at the very least, we need to sort of classify them.
Okay. So there's a paper that someone put in this literature search somewhere, and if I'm pronouncing the name wrong, Alicki et al. 1992, and this person and their friends do a very good job here of articulating problem-focused complaining and not problem-focused, and what emotional release versus discrete emotions versus positive. And so they have, and who's complaining to whom about what. So there's lots of stuff in there already. Yeah, see, I circled some things already.
So it's not text. Yeah. So okay. Yeah, that's why. Yeah.
Okay. So this paper is a good beginning. Go ahead.
I wanted to add that I totally agree that it's also a really good one for defining. I want to just add two concepts of what Vas, you were talking about, the constructiveness of complaining, and that other paper by Obey and Rousseau, they conceptualize complaining as constructive, and I think that may be another point to which we may choose to diverge, or at least allow us to look at complaining from multiple lenses. And the other, I threw in a couple more articles related to social support. There's a very rich literature in the domain of social support in the workplace that has begun to look at the content of the instrumental support. If it is the support positive or negative? Are you complaining and just needing a shoulder to cry on? And what does that do to people's ability to do work and their own sentiments in the workplace and attitudes toward the work that they do? Or is it constructive? Is it positive? Is it uplifting? In which case it has a different impact on the quality of work that person does. And it's more at the individual level of analysis of individuals as opposed to teams, but we might still see some parallel there to draw on.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to jump in too and say, I want to build off of that. The most of the work that I've found or read was about individual complaining, and they happen to be in teams, but they didn't have to be in teams because they might have been complaining about their teams or complaining about something else, but it was they as an like this person as an individual who was complaining. So we have to really be clear on what level of analysis we're tackling. But if we decide to go down the individual level, there's a theory that's actually based on stress and coping by Lazarus. And I thought that could be a very good way of—
Do we have it in the papers?
Yeah, it's in my folder somewhere.
Yeah, which one is it?
Folkman and Lazarus, is that one?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm getting a funny printout on my screen, so I'm not sure I'm going to be of much help to you.
Vas put it up.
Yeah, that's the
put
one.
it up. Okay, so
Yeah,
there's
so,
a few of them that they did, right? Go ahead.
This model, they utilize the transactional model. That is my domain of expertise.
Okay, well, that's great.
I'm happy to.
So then let's ask the question: would complaining be a coping mechanism? Right? Could you define complete? Because coping is a big part of this.
That's right. It definitely could be, and but the Lazarus and Folkman transactional model is looking a lot at the appraisal. Is the stressor a threat? And
right.
We have to question: is the complaining as a coping mechanism because the stressor is a threat? And
That's
so
right.
we might want to start looking at defining.
Okay, so
are we able to detect when they're complaining what the source, what the stimulus is, what the source of the pressure?
I'm jumping ahead here maybe, but it seems like cultural intelligence could be a factor in that, because the stress for many of the students is operating in an unknown cultural environment or unfamiliar cultural environment, and there might be a role for cultural, like those who have higher cultural intelligence wouldn't be as stressed, wouldn't complain as much.
Yeah.
So just for the sake of discussion and see if you guys, I was playing with some models and some ideas. Now, if you could go back, Ross, on your screen to the complaining folder, I guess, I don't know, the root, yeah. And JK notes, if you could open that up and share that.
This one?
No, not the folder. Go back one. Back one level.
Oh, on
back one more level.
Yeah, I think that's all.
JK notes right there.
Oh yeah,
just about half. JK notes, yeah. Okay, so if you scroll to the bottom, all the way to the bottom. This is me trying to make sense of what I'm doing. Okay, so this is my beginnings of a model. And so
were you trying to draw some satanic symbol here or so?
Yeah, something like, I couldn't get the lines to work properly. But to Sharon's point, I tried to figure, okay, so what kind of things create complaining, or what kind of things do people appraise as sources of complaints? And I think what we have is types of teams. So we have a one-shot team, we have a project team, we have a virtual team, we have a global team, and maybe problems that happen in teams altogether. So I think one way of doing this is to identify common problems. And in another lingo, you call them barriers, Voss. So we already have some of these right in there. And then we can ask the the participants, well, how do you appraise these? And so he talks about two different types of appraisal, and we'll get into that later. But how important is it? And then can it actually be changed or improved, right? And so this is me trying to tease some stuff out. But if we go about this way, then we actually have to collect new data if we want to use Folkman's model, is the point, if we want to use his theory. So how interested are we of getting whatever done right now, or can we wait a semester is my question.
Well, I would say that, first one does not exclude the other. So we don't have to wait for the new data to start working on some of the existing papers. And it seems to me that we have enough data for at least several papers. And meanwhile, we can continue collecting data. Second, it doesn't have to be testing some existing theory. My bigger concern was that the papers we already have in mind when we will be writing them. Will we have some sort of theoretical foundation that we can cite, or do we need to develop it from scratch? So I think, these are all viable options, and we can pursue them all at the same time. So we can move on with the papers we already have in mind and see if existing theories can be, used to support our models, or we can develop something new, or moving forward, we can even try to test some, if there is an elegant existing model, maybe we can even collect additional data and test that specific model.
So there's another theoretical offshoot from the transactional model, the job demands control model or theory. And that job demands control theory basically says that the idea, it hasn't always been demonstrated, that as job demands increase, but control increases, the less strain you're going to have. And as if you have a lot of demands, but you have no control, then you'll have high strain. And so that's another avenue. And I do believe you collect data on people's perception of understanding what the project entails.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so connecting, do I feel confident in understanding the project in comparison to the complaints, starts to get at this framework.
Yeah. Yes, we do have those kinds of data, and that's about viable, a point. Yeah. Still, I don't know, while we still have, so I think we should definitely try to map everything like Justin did here, and there will be probably more, maybe there will be a longer list on one end, antecedents, a longer list of, outcomes of more typology. But I truly hope that the papers we will be writing will be relying on simpler models, something where, once you read it, you remember it, and you say, oh, remember that. Because if we have a model like the one in this paper here, my worry is that while you read it, yeah, they come up with some sort of explanation. But once you're done with it, it almost seems like there were too many boxes, so to speak. And so same thing here, if we wanted to use all of them in one paper, it's not the plan, I assume. But again, it would be almost too many for one model. But looking at a specific path could be very useful. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'll give, so unlike you, what I was trying to do for my literature review, so I was not looking at specific models. I wanted to get a sense of whether or not we have some literature. And so several things that struck me. One, obviously, there are a lot of consumer behavior studies. But so what's good about them, that many of them do talk about, for example, cultural differences in complaining behavior of consumers, or some of them talked about some individual characteristics of people. Like, for example, there was one paper that specifically looked at men versus women and propensity to complain. Another one looked specifically at cultural values. One was just individualism and collectivism. There was one that looked at all power, distance, and certainty avoidance. And so those are not necessarily useful directly, but probably something that we at the very least should cite, especially if we do those papers on who complains more at the country level and at the individual level. In terms of theories, I found two interesting sort of lines of discussion. One was the so-called complaint solution cycles and then discussion cycles. And so here it's nothing super fancy, but they talk about it as part of this kind of discussion or solution-oriented cycles. Essentially, what happens after complaining happens. And so what kind of cycle it leads to? Would it be like a downward spiral where everybody sort of recedes or regresses to just bitching about one another? Or is it a cycle where people take that as voice or a legitimate concern and do something about it? And so some of this is not really complaining per se, so it's more about like decision cycles, but they talk about how somebody bringing up a problem is an important step in that cycle. And another line of research, I didn't find much of it, but strangely enough, I actually wrote a couple of papers in my very early years, and I remember the literature, the stuff on so-called procedural justice. So you have distributive justice where we decide who gets what. But we have procedural justice where we decide how we get to a point. And so within the procedural justice literature, yes, bringing up the issue, essentially some people, believe that my voice should be heard. And it also could be cultural, could be personality, whereas other people believe that the boss should decide. And so those people who believe that it should be a more democratic process, they're much more likely to express their dissatisfaction. Whereas, and so there is a bunch of literature on how people treat procedural justice. And it seems to me that it would be to a large extent the same theory. So again, in the context of procedural justice, it's more about involvement in decision-making and being vocal if you're not happy about something. But it's very similar concepts, and we may be able to borrow some theory, some literature from there. Not much there on teams specifically, but there is still something on organizational procedural justice. And then finally, there was also something, or a bunch of literature that was they used the term called voicing dissatisfaction. And so here they talk more about satisfaction, dissatisfaction, but once it's about voicing dissatisfaction, it becomes basically complaining. And again, it's still mainly in consumer studies. It's still, but it seems like it's a distinct, body of literature. And so we need to look at all kinds of terminology, because sometimes some of these studies can appear under different names, not only complaining as we call it. So, and I'm not sure if I need to go into any specific studies, just given some.
Okay, Vas, I actually was looking at these consumer-related studies, and at first they seemed to be completely unapplicable.
Yeah.
But then I remembered reading few papers that talk about consumerism in higher education.
Oh,
and the fact that in some countries, like in the United States, where people pay for education some serious money, students actually do feel like they are buying a service.
Yeah.
So going back to this idea of thinking about which kind of nation complains more, maybe these consumer behavior papers can be used for that.
That's a very interesting idea. So we, again, in the work we do on university rankings, one of the issues that came up was how much they pay, and so maybe it will be also the same here. So when people pay more, they feel entitled, to a certain level of service, and when it's not there, they get annoyed. Whereas others perhaps don't have that same sense of entitlement. Yeah.
Although interestingly, my own observation in doing cross-cultural teams deep dive within country is that the venue of the complaints may differ.
Yeah.
So the complaining may be directly to a professor voicing it in person versus complaining on paper later on.
Yeah.
In Spain, the students don't pay to go to school, and they'll complain incessantly to the professor's face. That's too much work. We don't have time. And in the United States, where they do pay, my experience is that the complaints are not to us directly. It's at the end of the semester when we can't do anything.
They still need to get a good grade, so it's a strategic, yeah. Yeah. One thing I'll say though about complaining behavioral, consumer behavioral studies. So on the side where we are looking at who complains, so we have two papers in mind, right? So we want to look at which countries are more likely to complain, and then maybe personal characteristics. So I will not be surprised if the sort of antecedents or characteristics are the same. So people who complain, I've seen studies, as I said, where they compare consumers from different countries, where they compare individual consumers, and again, looking at their values, personality. So those could actually be the same things. So I will be surprised if people who complain about service, as consumers, are very different from those who complain about team members or the project or whatever else. So the outcomes in our case obviously are very different, because now we will be looking at team dynamics, and there it's basically I received service, and then did I complain or not, and that's the end of the story. Maybe some consequences for the service provider, but not, or maybe a repeat business, but not so much about, people around me, just because there is no team context. So I do agree that consumer behavior studies should be cited extensively, at least in the papers where we look at the predictors of complaining behavior.
And I think to Daria's other point of voice is a really important one as well. And something that you were talking about earlier sparked my thoughts about the literature and safety climate, and getting people to voice their concerns or their complaints, and giving access. And I think one of the projects is about the role of the instructor. The FAA, once they opened up hotlines, 800 numbers, and encouraged flight attendants, staff, marshals, pilots, and so forth to call if there are near misses, suddenly they started seeing more and were able to better study how to mitigate near misses, how to mitigate accidents. And I think that that's another rich literature to draw from. And I just put in a couple of articles into the folder.
Yeah. One thing I'll also say, I did find a few review studies specifically on complaining. Again, most of this was in the context of consumer behavior, but there was this one study literally called so complaining and complaints and complaining. Oh, let me share the screen one more second. So what I mean is that there have been I didn't find any meta-analysis. I was trying to find something, but I did find a few more kind of conceptual review studies. So there was this one, complaints and complaining functions, antecedents and consequences. So, and it seems to be more kind of the psychology. So and I didn't get the full text. I didn't have access right away, but based on the abstract, it seems to be a review study. And then also same thing here, employee voice behavior. So again, in the organizational context, they call it voice, but it's essentially about complaining. And again, it was a review study. Again, didn't get the full text, but based on the abstract, it seems to be a literature review study. So very interesting. And one more body of literature that I found, I forgot to mention, about climate. So there are several studies that talk about the climate in the organization and how that affects basically whether or not the climate is such that employees feel comfortable to complain. Psychological safety, retribution or fear of retribution, leadership structure, leadership sort of climate, personality of the leader, and so how those things relate to sort of voice behavior, as they call it. And so it seems to me that, again, at least for some of the papers we had in mind, that climate, like when we look at the professors' characteristics and the students' propensity to complain, so maybe some of that could be reused. And one more thing interesting, I actually found a journal that is called, where's the journal? The Journal of, So
is it the journal? Is it the one I put in the chat?
I don't know. Journal of Consumer Satisfaction, Dissatisfaction, and Complaining Behavior. The only problem is that it seems to be a very obscure journal because I couldn't find much more about it other than this login page. But yes, apparently there is a whole journal dedicated to this topic. So, now that
what are our next steps? Like,
yes.
we have all these ideas. How do we kind of converge?
So it seems to me that there is some literature that whatever paper we start writing, there will be enough to cite and maybe even use as we're developing our models. And so moving into the next semester, maybe we can talk about that later, closer to the beginning of the semester. If we find any interesting studies that we want to, or models that we want to test, we can definitely collect the data. But for now, I suggest let's go back to the list of papers we have in mind and collectively decide which ones or one we would like to sort of start with, and then maybe even see who wants to sign up to lead a particular study and, or what would be the role distribution. I believe last time Sharon and Daria said that they would be willing to do more of the kind of literature review preparation, but then maybe, I don't know, as always, maybe Longu can do more analyses. I would be happy to do some more writing. So whatever the, but I'm not sure if we should claim a specific paper and say, like, for example, I don't know, Justin will work on paper 1, I don't know, Bob will work on paper 2, Daria will work on paper 3, or should we say this one is, let's say paper 5, whatever that one is the most interesting. So let's all work on that one with, one person specifically will start working on the lit review, another one will start working on the analysis or something else. And so I'm not sure, what's the preference here. Does anyone have a specific study that perhaps you would like to definitely work on and maybe lead from the list, or maybe something new that we did not discuss?
I'm
Okay, so-
very, I think my inclination was toward paper one.
Same thing here. So I think we should probably maybe even try to, oh, sorry, not measures, this one. Maybe at least should try to quickly run some sort of rankings by nation and see if there is anything going on here. Same thing, by the way, with paper two. It almost seems to me like before we get into anything else, at the very least, we should do some mean differences or correlations and then see if anything's going on here.
Actually, if you scroll up in this document, I'm going to ask you to sort of review the measures with us again, because
Yes.
I'm not sure we have great measures of complaining. So if we're trying to do one of any paper really, how could we argue that we've actually captured the construct complaining?
Well, again, so we have several things that we potentially can do. So one, obviously, we have peer evaluated complaining behavior. So, and, presumably here we have observations by the whole team of the person's propensity to complain, be grumpy, and show irritation. And so, not a perfect measure, but it's not some evaluation. So, and on this one, potentially we can, go and do something. The second one is, self-reported, so it's a little bit, less trustworthy. But again, everybody did the same one. So again, here it was, did things ever got so bad that you had to complain to your supervisor, professor, coach? The challenge with this one is obviously that maybe some people were lucky and there was nothing to complain. Maybe they're very, prone to complaining, just there was no reason. And maybe others are very quiet and modest and never complain, but it was so bad that even they couldn't say, So therefore, this alone is a little bit trickier. But again, we do ask people if they ever had to go and complain. And again, presumably there was enough stuff going on in the semester that those who are likely to complain found a reason, and those who are not likely to complain, well, at least complained less. Then we have a bunch of variables that are more, since we talked about, different terms for complaining. So we talked about complaining, obviously, and even today. So we talked about voice, bitching, whining, shoulder to cry on, being grumpy, gossiping, voicing dissatisfaction, making a fuss, protesting. So in this case, when we look at, for example, if people are comfortable to say that they do not enjoy the project, if people are comfortable to say that not everything is clear or nothing is clear, if people are comfortable saying, I'm not motivated to continue working with this team, and this is something we do every week. So I would construe that as complaining. So like if it's a number between, let's say 70 and 100, they just share with us what's going on. But some students do put a 0 or 1 or 10, like, do you enjoy working with a project? Hell no. Is everything clear? Hell no. So I would even say that this is a form of complaining because, that's a report they send to the manager. And so again, I will not be surprised that we will find some systemic differences in how comfortable people are to show those low numbers. And I will not be surprised that from some countries we'll never see them, and from others we will see them a lot.
So on that point, though, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mentioned this before, that 0 in some cultures may be a viable number to give, but in other countries, 70 does basically mean it's terrible. The fact that they merely breathe and show up once in a blue moon allows them to say, okay, it's not totally 0, but definitely in graduate school in the United States, a 70, you're failing. You're not.
And that's we can look at that and see how those numbers, because in a sense it's different level of voicing dissatisfaction. Likewise, for example, I see that from some countries, especially, I see that people like habitually give all hundreds. Like, I don't know, I mean, it cannot be all perfect, but I'm not sure if they're just afraid that the professor will not be happy, or for them anything below 100 is considered complaining already. But I do see that from some countries, it's always like a perfect 100 and everybody's so happy. So, which again, it could not be true in reality, but it seems like they're not comfortable giving anything less.
Right.
Keyvan, you mentioned like things about bitching and whining and shoulder to cry on or whatever. I didn't see that in here. Maybe I missed that.
We don't have, obviously we don't have, that's what I was saying, that there are different distinct types, and we definitely don't have all of them. but we have some, and it seems like some of them are, as direct a measure as it gets. Does this person complain? You work with this person for the whole semester, so what's your impression? So that alone, it seems to me like, and because it's multi-rater, so there are 6 people evaluating you every week or whatever the number. Hopefully that's there is at least some reliability in that. It may not be a perfectly valid measure of whatever we're trying to measure, but it's
excuse me, I just remembered something. Going back to the comment about different meaning of numbers or ratings in different cultures. There was something in research about chronic complaining.
Yeah.
So like if we have weekly data, we can look at whether people actually complained at the same level. Like, was it always 0 or was it going up or down?
And also, Daria, not only over time, but we can also, like, if we look at, for example, complaining, we can look across the team. And so again, if the whole team is saying that there is a problem, maybe there is a problem. But if the whole team is happy and one person always is not, again, it may tell us something.
Yes, and the interesting thing then would be to see how the rest of the team will evaluate this one person.
Yeah, that's actually another one. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Do whiners get higher or lower evaluations? And is the team, there is some sort of a retribution in the form of low evaluations, or the team is saying, oh, okay, at least somebody's saying that. So I don't know. But just to finish with the data, so also we have the records from the coaching program, pretty good records actually for the last several semesters. So they keep track of everyone who has ever approached them with a, any request. And they classify those requests in different categories, like, asking for feedback, but there is also specifically complaining or talking about problems and asking for, wants to be heard about, problem in a team. And so in this case, it would be literally observations of the actual behavior. It will not be the whole sample, in a sense that not everyone talks to the coaches, but we have still hundreds of people over the course of the semester who do complain. And we can look at who those people are, what countries they are from, like, are there any systemic characteristics and differences between the group of people who complained versus those who didn't. So we know who didn't complain, we know who complained. And so maybe that would be sort of one of the measures. And then finally, we talked about the qualitative comments and how we can either manually, which we already have done, score and classify the comments in terms of, does it contain complaining or not, or maybe use even some sort of text recognition program like Behaviour or something to do it automatically. And again, here we have manually coded 2 years, 18,000 people, if I remember correctly, every week. And so one of the classifications or coding schemes was, what's the purpose of this comment? And it was to inform, to ask a question. I believe there was another category, and then one to complain. And so we can literally just look at those. And again, so here, not everyone leaves comments, and maybe sometimes no comment is the most vocal form of complaining. People are so mad that they don't want to say anything. But at least, a good portion, quite a few say, several sentences, sometimes even more. And some of those are clearly complaints. So again, we can look at that. So it's definitely not perfect, but it seems to me like it's pretty, it's enough, or it's a lot, and possibly more than in some other studies.
I think we need to be careful too. I mean, complaining to me requires action. So it's not an attitude, and it's not satisfaction or dissatisfaction. It's actually taking a step to voice the complaint. And that's why I think the qualitative comments and coaching records, those are super important, because that's where the actual complaint. I mean, if you think about where the students can complain, they can complain among themselves in their team. Yeah. We can't really capture that very much, other than some of the things that, their self-rating, or either their ratings of each other, like, oh, this person was a complainer, this person was not. They can complain to X culture itself, but that's through the coaching records and the qualitative comments. They might also complain directly to their professors. And this was a big discussion we had earlier in this project. It was first going on, like, how can we capture those data if students are complaining, because that happens all the time, but it doesn't get recorded. We don't know, we don't know what's going on there.
And I completely agree that it does require some action, although again, presumably all of the measures that we have here do sort of capture in some way or another the action. So like, for example, this one is asking, so did you
that one's good.
the action, right?
Yeah.
Self-reporting, same thing. So did you actually, take the steps? So did things ever that you had to complain and ask for help? So again, will it be an honest answer or perfectly cold? We don't know, but this one, in a way, yes, it's sort of measuring satisfaction, but again, it's expressed in a specific clicks and reports that goes to the managers. And as I said, I look at those numbers every single week. I'm not sure if you have to do it or you do it, but I do sometimes sort of take it, it's like with teaching evaluations. You get very good teaching evaluations, but there was this one student who said something negative, and then you don't sleep, even though the other 99 students were very happy. And same thing here. So I look at the numbers, and then once in a while, like every whatever, like 50, 60 people, there is somebody who gives like all zeros or like 1 and 2 and 3. Yeah. And you're like, so always it hurts me a little bit because I always take that as, the students have sort of had the name is known, the student knows I'll see it, or, the professor will see it. And yet the student sort of, boldly declares that, no, I'm not enjoying it. So in a way, it is a step, it is a complaint. And then obviously open-ended comments that, if they write something that is complaint, then. So to some extent, I think we do capture that action in one way or another here, or at least, should be capturing. Yeah. And then coaching records, obviously, yes.
So I have a bias towards quantitative stuff. So I just put that out there. Yeah. But does anybody have access to sort of basically coders, grad students or someone to go through some of the qualitative comment? Because I agree. I think of all of these things, probably the secrets are baked in there somewhere, but I'm not one to really help with qualitative stuff. And so if I can help, I need that coded, basically is what I'm saying.
So yes, if needed, I can recruit more people to do additional coding or whatever needs to be done. But so the way it's been done so far is that I'm trying to find, you can still see my screen here. Let me see if I can quickly find, so you see
because
what the data looks
what I'm thinking about is kind of like about what are we complaining? Is it actionable? Like all those things from that Amabile or whatever paper that we were talking about earlier, right?
Yes, yeah, and again, so I'm not sure the way we did it. It was fine-grained enough, so like we didn't talk about specific things. But so this is what I did. It was done, I think, last summer. I had a bunch of students working with me, but so we coded each comment in terms of its length. Was it a positive, neutral, or negative? Was it about interpersonal issues, a process issues, task, or other? But then one of these was specifically the students who coded. There were 3, I believe, students working with me. Simone, Jan, like you even met some of those students at the symposia, those of you who attended. But one of them was, yes, was it to inform, to complain, to make a suggestion, or to ask a question? And so that's week 1. So there is not much going on here. And I think it also depends on the semester. But yeah, there were some people here who complained, like whatever this one was, time zone problem. Well, in this case, I guess it's a very short complaint, but yeah, he's talking about a problem here. And so some of them make much longer comments like this one, not a very long one, but something. And so it did contain complaining in it. And so, and then dishonest people. So it's just complaining about dishonesty. And so in the last category was the specific topic. So we eventually boiled it down to about 32, I believe, distinct topics. And so in this case, it's a complaint about some dishonesty on the team. Or for example, this one is also complaining, and then time consuming, takes too much time. So it's not a perfect coding scheme perhaps, but at least we know which ones contain some form of a complaint. And if needed, maybe we can go back and classify it more fine-grained, so to speak.
Hey, Voss, point that you had some positive comments there, but it looked like that one positive and it said free writer. Can you have a positive comment that is also a complaint? Is it coded as a complaint?
Again, we might want to sort of double check the coding, but yeah, this is a good experience for us to work with different countries and cultures. So I guess that's what makes it a positive. However, and I guess that's where the complaining comes.
Yeah.
Some people, team members didn't show up or contribute anything. The situations may make the 5 people less of us feel very tired to finish the project. Fortunately, my team members who really worked were really nice and smart. I'm so happy. And so, okay, this one is tricky because he's saying
This one is mixed.
Yes and no. And
great stuff, and in the end we all learned, but so I guess this would have been inform and complain, I guess. I'm not sure if maybe whoever was the coder didn't think that 2 categories are possible.
I know that could be a tricky part. We might need to go back through.
Well,
exactly.
one, though, again, it's a time-consuming task to do it manually, but
Yes.
again, apparently some of the software does it pretty well. So maybe we can instead sort of run the whole thing and maybe even more accurately, because at this time it was coded by hired students who didn't have an internal sort of intrinsic motivation. They just did it because I paid them. And so I will not be surprised that the accuracy is not perfect. Although even if you try really hard, sometimes it's not perfect. But so going back to the papers, I'm actually with Sharon on, trying to do the initial analysis by country and maybe by individual characteristics, and maybe even at this stage in purely sort of correlational form, just to see if anything correlates with anything. So by country, to see if, and I do have a database somewhere where I have major, national characteristics like GDP per capita, Gini, democracy or freedom index. And so we can then literally just add those variables to countries and see if we have any differences. What may happen, Sharon, by the way, I tried to do the same thing for cultural intelligence. So the idea was to provide rankings on cultural intelligence, just like Hofstadter, for example, had rankings on cultural values. I thought, hey, let's see who's culturally smart and who's culturally dumb. And the problem was that there was really not much difference from country to country. I could sort of standardize the scores in some way and, like say, if it's below 4, it's very low. If it's above 4, it's very high. But in reality, everybody was like on a 7-point scale was between 4 and 5, so to speak. And so there was not a huge difference. And then also I didn't quite see the systemic variation. The sort of the stereotypes are that maybe Americans don't care about the rest of the world. Maybe they would score lower, or maybe Europeans travel so much, you travel for 5 minutes and you join, visit 5 countries. But there was really not that much visible difference. So everybody was roughly in the same range. And so
on cultural intelligence, I wouldn't expect there to be much variation, actually.
Well, we had wonderful, theories, so that maybe countries that border with more other countries, maybe countries that have multiple national languages, countries that score higher on globalization index. So the idea was that maybe they will score higher. Basically, like if you take Tajikistan versus, for example, Switzerland, one is extremely multicultural, extremely connected. I mean, half of the country are probably people from somewhere else. And the other one, almost never they see someone. But when you look at cultural intelligence as, like and it all type of deal, are you motivated to interact with people from other cultures? Are you adjusting your behavior when you interact with people from other cultures? It seems like they were roughly equally prone to, to saying, yes, I'd like to or not. Yes, I try to speak slower or faster or whatever else. Do you know much about cultures of other countries? And since it's self-evaluated, they were like, yeah, I think I do. So we didn't really see much on those measures, even though theoretically, that kind of exposure should have had some sort of an effect.
Psychologically, cultural intelligence, it's a more of a personality trait. Cross-cultural competence is something that is different, more developmental. But you were also talking about if you're looking at it with MBA students or adult working population, then you have the effect of
very true,
who is going into an MBA.
Like selection bias, essentially, right? So
exactly,
they're not necessarily, true representation of the sample. So absolutely, and we do have now cultural knowledge. So it's an objective test. Like it would literally ask, do you leave tips in Japan or not? And so those who've been to Japan, we know that we don't tip in Japan, but people either know it or don't. And so that one may be a little bit more sort of discriminating across countries and showing more difference, because when it talks about attitudes, then maybe, or self-reported attitudes on top of that. So, but here hopefully we'll see some differences, and hopefully we'll see some correlates with personal characteristics, national characteristics, and maybe in that case, it would first provide the foundation for subsequent studies. but can also make a good study in and of itself. So, but I don't know. I mean, so it seems like there is some interest in the study one, study two possibly as well. Anyone is interested in profiles, types of complainers, role of instructor? These are tricky because I'm not even sure, you know. So, but again, we do have the data definitely for the typology if we wanted to do it. Professors, that's a whole different data set, so that would be a little harder to pull, but yeah, possibly. Anyone interested in rank of the university and tuition fees? We talked about that. So
I think that can get really ugly.
why not? I mean, you know, so we are doing something on with a couple of people on sort of university. They started talking about prestige. And so there are two key variables. Lon Ju is actually the one who's running the analysis, so he can say more. But the idea there is that we have the university rank and we have the country rank. So there are like national, what is it called? Like country reputation rankings, right? Or country prestige, country reputations. And we actually had a meeting yesterday, so Lon Ju found quite interesting, you know, results. And usually, yes, the more diversity of the rank you see on the team, the worse things get. So it was not so much about the average level, but diversity. Although at the country level, I think the average country level reputation. So people from reputable countries basically create all kinds of problems, right? So I think that was the conclusion. So maybe we have something like this here. And then antecedents and consequences. So it's sort of nationality and personality that makes the antecedents, but consequences, that would be a whole distinct side of the equation.
That goes to a bit of what Justin was talking about, I think, with the Lazarus and Folkman transactional model. What I was suggesting, I put it in the chat that we could be looking at an interaction between ambiguity and complaining to predict performance.
Yeah. And this is where it really gets interesting, because unlike the simple correlations or rankings, this one actually becomes much more fine, you know, microscope level look at the issue.
Yeah, so I would be interested in paper 6 from that from that lens.
Yeah, let's take it, highlight the ones. Choice of communication tools and complaining. This one's tricky. I just know that communication tools are very hard to condense to a single number. So, you know, so I almost caution not to jump into this one too early, because the math of communication will become complicated.
Yeah, I think we do not have data for that.
We have, no, the challenge is that we have more data. Like we know who communicated with whom, how frequently, for how long, using which tools. The challenge,
I'm so sorry, I have to run to another meeting. I just saw it's after 10.
Yeah, and you'll see the recording of the rest.
Yeah, well, I was thinking that the most kind of basic form of complaint will be face-to-face, and that one we do not get.
Yeah, no, the idea here was that, do people, when they use video conferencing like we do now, does that reduce the chance of complaining? Because now we sort of know how we look, we know each other, we spend some almost like FaceTime together. So does that lower, like versus teams that only use emails? And so the idea was that if you use only emails, when the team members are just 2 words on the screen, you don't know even sometimes how old they are, who they are, then you feel much more comfortable expressing your dissatisfaction than when you are sort of become friends. And so that was the idea. But the problem is that almost all teams at least sometimes use Skype. So will we use, you know, like frequency of video communication? I guess we can use that. It just, there are so many different channels and types of communication going in a team that it's hard to condense it to a specific number. So, but yeah, so 8 would be relatively easy. So we measured very carefully from 2020 how much COVID affected the person. From, are you able to leave home? Has your schedule changed at the university? Did you lose the job? To how did it impact you? Did you feel, you know, that it had an effect, you know, psychological effect on you? So from objective to subjective perception. And so maybe we can look at whether or not those who experienced more stress due to COVID, did they complain more? So that seems to be like a relatively simple study, and could be also timely, like if it's done fast, you know, still many journals now still have sort of calls for those kinds of papers. So potentially we can do something like that. We know that satisfaction went up in COVID times compared to the usual. So I'm not sure if it will also reduce complaining or there are differences. So, but this one could be a relatively easy one, and sort of on this wave of COVID-19 interest, maybe. And then network analysis is complicated, probably too early. Constructive conflict, we need to do more theory. So I don't know, I mean, are you ready to commit to a specific study, or do we want to give it some time? I'm not sure how to.
I think we just should there.
Daria, your voice is it just me, or?
I'm just saying we.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, please. So for some reason you disappeared for a second.
Okay, I'm just saying we should start somewhere. I mean, all these studies are interesting. So maybe start at the beginning with one or two, because they kind of set the tone to everything else.
So yeah, if there is something, then there is something, yeah.
So let me jump in then. So when I look at this, I actually see great similarities between 2 and 6. So one is on the individual level and one is on the team level. So if we measure complaining, and I don't know when exactly, in which semester we measured it, but the team is just an aggregation and the individual is just an individual. So it's really very similar. Once you prepare the data, you just test the individual stuff, and then a day later you test the team stuff. So if someone's going to dig into number 2, they should be the same person to do number 6, at least from a data perspective.
Other than there are some intrinsically team level characteristics that will not go into number 2, like team size, team diversity, maybe. So those could be, and then when I say team diversity, it could be, national diversity, but it could be also differences in age. And so those, so there will be like an extra layer. Yeah,
Vas, my point was we only measure complaining in a certain semester. And therefore the person who jumps into that, or 2 semesters, or a limited number of semesters. So the person who jumps into there probably should do both.
Yes, I agree. What I mean is that it can still be 2 distinct papers in the end.
No question.
Yeah,
no
absolutely.
Question.
But yes, you cannot do team level without looking at individual characteristics anyway, right? So, and once you have individual characteristics, probably once you aggregate it to the team level, the same outcomes will be the same. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, we can stop here and then let's take a day or 2 and then everybody decides. But ultimately, in a larger group like this one, we need sort of champions. So it would have to be that somebody sort of takes charge of a study and says, okay, I'll do the, number 1. Who wants to work with me? But, I'll be the one coordinating. I will be the one sending reminders when needed. I will be the one sort of, doing some of the basic work. So because otherwise we may be, end up with complaining about free riding. So I'm not sure if anyone's ready to make those commitments, but.
So I actually wanted to ask Longju something, but he just disappeared. So maybe if I mention his name, he'll come back. I don't know him well. I've never worked with him before. Heard great things about you, Longju, but you seem to be a data guy or analyst too. So if we're going to work on a team, maybe we can help each other. But my suspicion is that it's probably best to spread our skills out on separate paper. Nothing against you. I think you're a wonderful guy.
That's exactly what I wanted to. So there is no need to. So you both are sort of data guys, and there is no point of 2 of you working on the same data set because it would be duplication. And so it would be a good idea if one takes one and the other one takes. We can cover more ground that way. Other than, I don't know, maybe at some point you might want to compare your notes or maybe take at each other's.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because what Longju does in most of the cases, like I used to teach statistics, but the kind of work he does, or you, Justin, for that matter, like I can only pretend to be smart and say that I understand what you're doing, but it's not the case where I can say, oh, did you consider Wilkes lambda schmamda, test, for something? No, I wouldn't. But yeah. So then, I don't know, I mean, is anyone ready to commit right away, or do we want to kind of think about it some more and perhaps also leave, there are several people missing here, let them watch the recording and then see what comments they have.
Well, I'm Longju, now that you're sort of, I can see you and you're back, do you have a preference? And then I'll be willing to sort of pick up where you are not interested, or vice versa. Let's make that one.
Actually, I don't have any preference. Any way that works for you, it will work for me.
Okay, very, very kind of you.
One question though, so when it comes to data preparation, so I'll be happy to do it, and but also Lonju and Justin, you guys are very comfortable with the data set by now, and I noticed one sort of thing, and that's a very, very good thing, that Justin tends to be extremely particular about data, which makes sense. And so often, even after I prepare the data, he still goes through everything and then sometimes finds mistakes or redoes it completely. Like I remember he redid, we did, what was it, peer evaluations or something. Like I had a script, everything was apparently, correctly, but Justin did it from scratch just to be sure. And that's what we need. But so the question is preparing the data set. At the very least, we need to put all of those complaint variables, and then probably all personal characteristics, and probably at least nationality and things like that. So does one of you want to do it, or should I do it? Or should I prepare the first raw form and then you can then clean it up and work with it? Because I think that would be the first step no matter what anyway.
Okay, so for me, go ahead, Lonju.
For me, and I think I have all the data cleaned up all the way up to 2021A.
So then maybe, yeah, if you want to take on that task, so by now you may even feel more comfortable with the data set than I am, if that's, yeah.
I can start do some grunt work.
But you're working off the original data set in my in the shared folder, right? Or you have your local copy? Because we do add from time to time little, corrections right in the file. And then obviously we will start adding the 2021 data any day now. So, but yeah, so either way is fine. But I guess it would be Justin, Lonju, and I who will need to work together in some form on preparation of the data. Maybe one of us will do more, but it seems like we'll need to coordinate. So,
we can have a meeting later and talk about.
Or one of us starts it, but then if questions arise, we can then together. But so I suggest, so it seems like nobody's quite ready to say, okay, I definitely want to lead this study, so this one's mine. Anyone? So maybe let's stop here. So we've discussed enough. It seems like we even identified the most promising studies. Let's then connect again in a few days by email, perhaps, if anyone volunteers, and maybe plan to meet next week again for some sort of a follow-up discussion, and then hopefully talking about specific papers and specific people taking charge. Does that sound like a plan? And meanwhile, Justin and Lonju, if you want to start looking at the data, please go ahead. And then again, it sounds like Lonju has everything. If that's the case, great. But if I need to extract some data and kind of prepare a new data file specifically for this study, same thing, let me know, I'll work on that.
Sure.
On my end, just for the record, I'm actually also very interested in the COVID study. So it seems like it's relatively simple. So we have complaining behaviors for that COVID. We have the complaining behaviors, more or less, whatever measures we have them. But we also have relatively clean measures of how much COVID affected the people. So as I said, it does ask what kind of restrictions are in place and how much, how many disruptions it created objectively. But then it also asks, did it affect you? Like, do you feel like you're under stress, able to do less? And then so we have that psychological sort of effect. And so I thought it could be as simple as literally just correlating those to see if there is any relationship. I mean, obviously at some point it can get more complicated in the sense that maybe, people from some cultures are affected, but it doesn't affect their performance. And then the opposite is true for other cultures. But it seems to me that, it'd be interesting to see if in the regions where COVID had a greater effect, if those people behave differently than,
So again, this comment is more or less directed to Lonju. The ranking studies, for whatever reason, they're not so interesting to me. I'm actually looking for models. Like I want to connect things and make predictions and stuff. And I'm not sure the ranking study is nice. Like it doesn't, at least to me, it doesn't seem to lend itself well to model building. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, Lonju, then maybe I think it's 1 and then whatever number the COVID is. If you want to sort of volunteer for that, and I'll volunteer for 2 and 6 because I think those two come together. Does that seem reasonable wherever you are?
Sure. For me, I have all the data available for study. Not all the data, but I have some data on country. Like GDP, Gini coefficient, education expense. I also have some data on university rankings, and also I have like personal like personalities and all those individual level characteristics. I can easily report some results about study 1 and 2 and that university ranking study before our next meeting.
One thing I'll say on ranking studies, yes, they will not appear in AMJ or JIBS, but there are two big factors going for them. One, if published, they can generate a lot of citations. So for all kinds of papers, people love rankings. So like, for example, Hofstede's rankings, obviously, have been cited hundreds, if not thousands of times. But even if it's something like complaining, I mean, who knows what kind of studies people will be doing, and it's convenient to have a list of countries and the rank. So I will not be surprised if people will use it basically as a data source. And second, we have an ongoing invitation from the European Journal of International Management for what they call the ex-culture section. So they plan to publish 1 or 2 papers in every issue. And there are several submissions that are already going into that. And so a ranking study could be a relatively easy publication in eGym. It's not a top journal, but it's a respectable journal, impact factor of like 2 or something like that. And so, or 1.8. And so it could be a relatively quick, like almost like a research note type of deal, unless we find some very interesting relationships. So, but it could be a low sort of value, but low demand type of paper. So done quickly, publish, and then hope that people will use it for future research. So therefore, yes, so those could be still viable, even though they will not be revolutionary and will not get us bonuses from our schools or promotion and tenure. But it could be an easy way to get a couple of publications that way. All right, Justin is laughing.
Is thinking like there's no bonuses at my school anyway, so I'm just being honest.
Well, the reason I brought that up, at my school, one, I'm applying for the full professor finally after like so many years at the school. But one of the concerns my dean expressed was that you have a lot of publications. In fact, I think I had like 12 last year or something like that. But he says it's been some time since we saw an FT50 publication. So I had a few JIBs and JP and stuff like that, but it has been a few years. And he says, I'm not sure if you're just going for quantity or you don't want to go through the grueling process. But to us, that top publications like AMJ, JIBs, JP, those kinds of matter. And we want to see some of them at least once in a while. And second, we do have a $5,000 bonus for publication in FT50. And so what I mean is that if I get another eGym, it doesn't make any difference. I have, up to a dozen of those every year anyway. And so it's not, nobody will even notice. So for me, it would be wiser and smarter to try to have instead 1 top than 5 regular. On the other hand, if there is an interesting idea, just because it cannot make it in a top journal, I still am very interested in pursuing it. So, and it's the same story with Mariana. So she's also applying for promotion. We talked to her and exactly the same story. She needs something in top. Like she says, like, I don't care about 10 more regular, I need 1 top. And so we were looking for something that has that potential. So yes, with the ranking study, I don't think we have that potential, but then at the same time, I will not be surprised if it turned out to be more cited study than whatever, is published in top. So anyway, thank you everyone. So then, yeah, till next week, I guess. And maybe we'll do another quick doodle because it seems like at least some of the key people couldn't make it. So I think Daniel said that he has some sort of a committee meeting at this time every week, and then somebody else was not able to come. So we'll see if we can. Okay.
Okay, thanks for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.